Today on the newscast, Israel says that Iran was behind the blast that rocked an Israeli-owned cargo ship late last week. Will Israel respond? Plus, missiles over Riyadh and more airstrikes around Damascus. The Middle East never sleeps, and we've got all the breaking details for you coming up. Hey folks, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to the Watchman Newscast. A very busy weekend in the world's most pivotal and chaotic region, the Middle East. Some breaking news stories developing over the past few days alone that you need to know about. So let's get right into it. Let's start with Friday, February 26th. Now that's when an Israeli-owned cargo ship was traveling through the Gulf of Oman, headed from Saudi Arabia to Singapore when it was struck by an explosion. Now, thankfully, the ship did not sink. No one on board was hurt. It is currently in the port of Dubai in the United Arab Emirates undergoing repairs, but a very serious incident, folks. 4 large holes ripped into this ship. It's unclear what caused the explosion as of yet. It may have been missiles. Some are saying in Israel, some Israeli television networks and media outlets. Others are saying it was a mine. Others are saying that Iran's Revolutionary Guards Corps, surprise, surprise, placed an explosive device on this ship and caused this blast. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said just today, Monday, March 1st, that yes, Iran was behind this attack. He echoed what the Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz and the Chief of Staff for the Israel Defense Forces both said this weekend. They said, look, Iran's fingerprints are very likely on this explosion, targeting, not a coincidence, folks, an Israeli-owned cargo ship. It's called the MV Helios Ray. That's the name of the ship. It's owned by a prominent Israeli businessman, and the Iranians knew very well who owned that ship, and it was traveling very close to Iran in the Gulf of Oman when the explosion occurred. 2 things here to remember in terms of why people are saying, hey, this was Iran. Number one, clearly, tensions have never been higher than they are right now between Iran and Israel. There's been these tit-for-tat kind of attacks, military drills. Tensions are very high. We've been reporting this here on the Watchman Newscast over the past few months. That's number one. Number two, Iran has a history of this sort of behavior in those waters, in the Gulf of Oman, in the Persian Gulf, in the Strait of Hormuz, that strategic waterway where they are planting explosive devices on ships, hijacking ships basically, and seizing ships as well in those waters. So add all that up, folks, and you have what is very likely an Iranian attack. Also, coming against the backdrop of Iran's vows of revenge for the death of its nuclear weapons mastermind Mohsen Fakhrizadeh back in November 2020. Iran has been vowing revenge for his attack and blaming Israel for it, for his death, and blaming Israel for it for months now. This could be the latest in a string of Iranian attempts to avenge the death of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh. Look no further than last month, early February 2021, there was an explosive device planted outside the Israeli embassy in New Delhi, India. Again, thankfully no one was injured in that attack, but it was an Iranian proxy group operating inside India that claimed responsibility for that explosion outside the Israeli embassy in New Delhi. But did the response come last night, Sunday, February 28th, where once again we had airstrikes around the Syrian capital of Damascus? Now, this has happened many times, folks, over the past few years. Hundreds, probably thousands of Israeli airstrikes carried out against Iranian and Hezbollah targets, not only in that Damascus area, but throughout Syria from west to east to south. But last night's strikes came south of Damascus in a spot, in a neighborhood, an area, which is a known Iranian Hezbollah stronghold. We don't have any information on what was hit just yet, if there were casualties. Usually they kind of come in after these strikes. We're still waiting to hear some of the results from this airstrike last night, but clearly this was another Israeli strike against Iranian and Hezbollah interest in Syria. I do not believe, if a response is coming to this cargo ship blast, I do not believe that last night was Israel's response, honestly, folks, because as I mentioned, we've seen probably thousands of Israeli airstrikes against Iranian and Hezbollah targets inside Syria over the past few years. This seems just like another in that long line of strikes, with Israel pushing Iran and Hezbollah back from the Israel-Syria border and putting a dent in the Iranian regime's weapons shipments and weapons development inside Syria that would be used, those weapons, against the Jewish state, in particular those precision-guided missiles, PGMs for short, which Iran is trying to pass off into the hands of its most lethal proxy, Hezbollah. And this all comes, of course, on the heels of that U.S. airstrike against Iranian-backed militias along the Iraq-Syria border on Thursday night, February 25th. Up to 22 Iranian-backed fighters were killed in those strikes, and they, of course, were a response to 3 separate major incidents over the past 2 weeks alone of Iranian-backed Iraqi militias raining down rockets on U.S. targets inside Iraq. And one more thing to add to the fire, Saturday night, February 27th, just 2 days ago, ballistic missiles launched by, again, Iran-backed rebels, this time the Houthi rebels in Yemen. They reportedly launched missiles at Riyadh, the Saudi capital. The Saudis say that they intercepted those missiles, thankfully. Hey, at the same time, those Houthi rebels are on literally the warpath and in the midst of a major offensive where they are trying to seize another large chunk of Yemen and further tighten their grip on that country, again, with full backing of the Iranian regime. Folks, what's the pattern here? Whether it's Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Yemen, you guessed it. The Iranian regime is the head of the snake behind this terror and these terror advances and attacks throughout the region. So we are monitoring all of this for you very closely. In terms of the U.S. and Iran, I said last week in the wake of those U.S. airstrikes, this does not change, sadly, the Biden administration's strategy of returning to that disastrous Iran nuclear deal. An interesting wrinkle, once again, over the weekend, very busy weekend, the last weekend of February, the Iranian regime responded and rejected direct talks with the United States. I expect that to change, folks, in the weeks and months to come. You will see. I'm sad to say U.S. officials once again at the negotiating table with the world's #1 state sponsor of terrorism, the Iranian regime, which has not renounced its wicked ways, but as we reported for you here today, is only enhancing and increasing its nefarious activity throughout the Middle East. And what happens in the Middle East does not stay in the Middle East, folks. What is happening in that region right now will eventually profoundly affect all of us, no matter where we live. Hey, we love our Watchman Newscast subscribers and viewers, and we want you to have that same peace as the winds are roaring and the waves are crashing in this upside-down world. We want you to have the peace and the confidence to know that God Almighty is still on the throne. He will never leave you or forsake you. You might be saying, I'm not ready yet. I haven't prayed in years. I've just distanced myself from God. I'm not good enough. Here's the great thing about it. He's not some distant, angry God. He's waiting there for you with his arms wide open and saying, hey, where have you been? It's been a while. Welcome back. He just wants that relationship with you. And folks, don't put it off. We live, again, in perilous times. Don't put it off any longer. Now is the time. I just want to encourage you with that. And we love you here again at the Watchman Newscast. We so appreciate all of our subscribers. And we look forward to being with you again tomorrow. Thanks for joining us today. God bless you. And until next time, never hold your peace. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. If you enjoyed this episode and want to see more, make sure you go ahead and hit the like button, click subscribe, and tap the bell icon to turn on notifications for new Watchman Newscast episodes every weekday.